Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Tuesday night segment of Divine Femininity United. I'm your girl, Dr. Bianca Missy Lee, and we are here for our next collective reading of this amazing. Oh my goodness, this book has been so awesome. That book is The Shack, written by William P. Young. Okay, so far, you all, so far, we have read through 5 chapters. And man, oh man, we have learned of the history of Mackenzie. Mackenzie Philips is the main character. Also, you all, just a side note reminder, this is based off of true events. Based off of true events, okay? So that's what makes this even wilder. But we have been introduced to Mackenzie Philips, who is the main character, his wife, his children, his friends, and his childhood and what he went through, abuse and things like that with his father. We've gone through he and him taking his kids to the campsite the weekend before school. The school year was about to begin. And then the great sadness took place. The great sadness being, this was mentioned in chapter 3, being the no, the great sadness was chapter 4. That was when his youngest daughter Missy was abducted, and what we assume was murdered. Okay, now in chapter 5, 3 years has passed, and he's coping and he's dealing. The family's dealing, but there's a lot of things happening and memories coming up and whatnot. So um, he got a note, an anonymous note in the mailbox. No return address, no stamp, no anything, and it was a note that said, Mackenzie, it's been a long time. I miss you. I want to see you. Meet me at the shack. Now, the shack is where 3 years prior, his abducted daughter's bloody dress was found. Okay. So any mention of the shack, it sends back these ugly memories and things like that. So he 3 years later, he got this note, and now this tugging in him is pulling him back to the shack. He don't know why. He don't know who's playing this cruel joke on him. He don't know if this is the murderer trying to come back and get the rest of his family. He don't know what this is, but something in him is telling him to go. So he went. This was chapter 5. He went. Okay, he went, only to get there and not see anything, just seeing an old dilapidated cabin, and see his daughter's still dried blood stain where they found the dress and things like that 3 years prior. And these floods of anger and rage and sorrow and guilt and everything started coming out of his belly. And he just started reacting. He started shattering the place and things like that. And in his anger fit, he's thinking, what am I doing? Why am I even here? This is stupid. I don't know why I came all this way for. He turned, left the shack, and about 50 feet away from the front porch, all of a sudden, the ice and the snow that was surrounding him is now blooming, flourishing flowers and aromatic and aromas that he had never smelled before. Flowers were blooming in the area that are not even native to the area. And then he turns around and he sees this once dilapidated shack, now this strong structure of logs and things like that. He sees the chimney, ablaze, and he hears chatter and laughter inside, and he smells aromas and cooking and whatnot. And now he's thinking he's hallucinating. What in the world is going on? I gone mad? Oh my God, what is happening here? And he's thinking, as he was thinking too, one of the thoughts as he went up to the shack was, is God asking me to come up there? And if it is God, then he got a bone to pick with God, okay, about allowing what took place with his daughter to take place, okay? So in his once he snapped out of this, what he deemed as a hallucination, and he says, okay, okay, okay. So God is in there. He stormed up to the door, and in his fit, about to bang on the door, opens the door opens, and there's the big black woman saying, Mackenzie Allen Philips, welcoming him, hugging him. I've been looking for you. Let me see you. Oh, you look so good. It's been a long time. Greeting him as if, they knew each other. He knew her and she knew him. Then he enters. She takes his coat, removes his gun that he wanted to protect himself with, that he got from his friend William, whose Jeep he drove up to the shack. So they greet him, and then they introduce themselves to him. The big black woman, her name, she said, I prefer Elucia, but you can call me Papa. Papa is the name of endearment that Nan, his wife, and Missy, the abducted daughter, used to call God Papa, or still call God. Nan did call God Papa. She says, God, the black woman says, I prefer, or I'm partial to the name Elucia, but you can call me Papa. And so the next image, which was the said Asian, he described her as an Asian image, but for some reason he couldn't really make this person out, because the view of this person was, kind of, he was able to see her in his peripheral, but never a clear view straight forward. And so, but we know in the book that this person here was a collector of tears. And so she would wipe his tears and things like that, okay? Then, so she introduced herself as Sarayu. And then the third person was a male, and he was described as having Arabian features, and he had on jeans and a plaid shirt rolled up to his, just above his elbows, had on a tool belt and things like that. And he was named to be Jesus. Okay. But he says, but people call me Yeshua, Jesse, Joshua, whatever you want to call me. Okay. Of course, at this point, Mack is thinking he has completely and utterly lost his mind. Okay. So that was the end of chapter 5. Now we're about to go into chapters 6 and 7. Chapter 6 is a piece of pie. Pi is the symbol, the mathematic symbol for 3.14. That's the symbol that's listed in the book. A piece of pie. Chapter 6 and chapter 7, God on the dock. Okay. A piece of pie and God on the dock. All right. Now, we're airing on multiple platforms. We're airing on Clubhouse, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, all over the place, okay? So wherever you are viewing from, I thank you for your presence. I really, really do. I thank you for listening. At any point over the course of the reading, you have something you want to add, or you have a comment or something, use the comment section. That's what it's there for. And I'll periodically go back and forth, and I'll give voice to your words, okay? But if anything pops out or stands out, go ahead and use the chat, and or if you just want to listen, just listen. We're just here to go along in this journey. Keep in mind, I have not read ahead of you all. I'm reading with you all, and my mind is blown too. So as I'm reading, I'm envisioning. I hope you are too. And it's just like, oh my goodness, the details in books. Okay, there is a movie depiction of this book, but it is nothing like the book. Oh my goodness, it's nothing like the book. The book and the details in the book, it makes you feel like you are there. And every chapter, I have to remind myself, this is based on true events. And it's just mind blowing. Okay, without further ado, The Shack, chapters 6 and 7. Chapter 6, A Piece of Pie. There's a quote from Jacques Ellul of Anarchy and Christianity. And it states, no matter what God's power may be, the first aspect of God is never that of the absolute master, the Almighty. It is that of the God who puts himself on our human level and limits himself. Mm. Well, Mackenzie, don't just stand there gawking with your mouth open like your pants are full, said the big black woman as she turned and headed across the deck, talking the whole time. Come and talk to me while I get supper on. Or if you don't want to do that, you can do whatever you want behind the cabin. She gestured over to the roof without looking and slowing down. You'll find a fishing pole by the boat shed that you can use to catch some lake trout. She stopped at the door to give Jesus a kiss. Just remember, she turned to look back at Mack, you got to clean what you catch. Then, with a quick smile, she disappeared into the cabin, armed with Mack's winter coat and still carrying the gun by two fingers, a full arm's length away from her. Mack was standing there with his mouth indeed open and an expression of bewilderment plastered to his face. He hardly noticed when Jesus walked over and put an arm around his shoulder. Sarah Yu seemed to have just evaporated. Isn't she great? Exclaimed Jesus, grinned at Mack. Mack turned and faced him, shaking his head. Am I going crazy? Am I supposed to believe that God is a big black woman with a questionable sense of humor? Jesus laughed. She's a riot. You can always count on her to throw you a curve or two. She loves surprises, and even though you might not think it, her timing is always perfect. Really? Said Mack, still shaking his head, and not sure if he really believed that. So now what I'm supposed to do? You're not supposed to do anything. You're free to do whatever you like. Jesus paused and then continued, trying to help by giving Mack a few suggestions. I'm working on a wood project in the shed. Sarah Yu is in the garden. Or you could go fishing, canoeing, or go and talk to Papa. Well, I sort of feel obligated to go and talk to him, her. Oh, now Jesus was serious. Don't go because you feel obligated. That won't get you any points around here. Go because it's what you want to do. Mack thought for a moment and decided that going into the cabin actually was what he wanted to do. He thanked Jesus, who smiled, turned, and headed off to his workshop, and Mack stepped across the deck and up to the door. Again, he was alone, but after a quick look around, he carefully opened it. He stuck his head in, hesitated, and then decided to take the plunge. God, he called, rather timidly and feeling more than a little foolish. I'm in the kitchen, Mackenzie. Just follow my voice. He walked in and scanned the room. Could this even be the same place? He shuddered at the whisper of lurking dark thoughts and again locked them out. Across the room, a hallway disappeared at an angle. Glancing around the corner into the living room, his eyes searched out the spot near the fireplace. But there was no stain covering the wood surface. He noticed that the room was decorated tastefully, with art that looked like it had been either drawn or handcrafted by children. He wondered if this woman treasured each of these pieces, like any parent who loves their children would. Maybe that was how she valued anything that was given to her from the heart, the way children seem to give so easily. Mack followed her soft humming down a short hallway and into an open kitchen dining area, complete with a small four-seat table and wicker-backed chairs. The inside of the cabin was roomier than he had expected. Papa was working on something with her back to him, flour flying as she swayed to the music of whatever she was listening to. The song obviously came to an end, marked by a couple of last shoulder and hip shakes. Turning to face him, she took off the earphones. Suddenly, Mack wanted to ask 1,000 questions or say 1,000 things, some of them unspeakable and terrible. He was sure that his face betrayed the emotions he was battling to control. And then in a flash of a second, he shoved everything back into its battered heart's closet, locking the door on the way out. If she knew his inner conflict, she showed nothing by her expression, still open, full of life, and inviting. He inquired, May I ask what you're listening to? You really want to know? Sure. Now Mack was curious. West Coast Juice, group called Diatribe, and an album that isn't even out yet called Heart Trips. Actually, she winked at Mack. These kids haven't even yet been born. Right. Mack responded, more than a little incredulous. West Coast juice, huh? It doesn't sound very religious. Oh, trust me, it's not. More like your Eurasian funk and blues with a message and a great beat. She sidestepped toward Mack as if she were doing a dance move and clapped. Mack stepped back. So God listens to funk? Mack had never heard funk talked about in any popular righteous terms. I thought you would be listening to George Beverly Shea or the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, something churchier. Now, see here, Mackenzie, you don't have to be looking out for me. I listen to everything, and not just to the music itself, but the hearts behind it. Don't you remember your seminary classes? These kids ain't saying anything I haven't heard before. They're just full of vinegar and fizz, lots of anger, and I must say, with some good reasons too. They're just some of my kids showing and spouting off. I'm especially fond of those boys. Yep, I'll be keeping my eye on them. Max struggled to keep up with her, to make some sense of what was happening. None of his old seminary trainings was helping in the least. He was at a sudden loss for words, and his million questions had all seemed to abandon him. So he stated the obvious. You must know, he offered, calling you Papa is a bit of a stretch for me. Oh, really? She looked at him in a mock surprise. Of course I know. I always know. She chuckled. But tell me, why do you think it's hard for you? Is it because it's too familiar for you? Or maybe because I'm showing myself as a woman, a mother, or... No small issue there, Mack interrupted with an awkward chuckle. Or maybe it's because of the failures of your own Papa. Mack gasped involuntarily. He wasn't used to having deep secrets surface so quickly and openly. Instantly, guilt and anger welled up, and he wanted to lash out with sarcastic remark in response. Mack felt as if he were dangling over a bottomless chasm and was afraid if he let any of it out, he would lose control of everything. He sought for safe footing, but was only partially successful, finally answering through gritted teeth. Maybe it's because I've never known anyone I could really call Papa. At that, she put down the mixing bowl that had been cradled in her arm, and leaving the wooden spoon in it, she turned toward Mack with tender eyes. She didn't have to say it. He knew she understood what was going on inside him, and somehow he knew she cared about him more than anyone had ever. If you let me, Mack, I'll be the Papa you never had. The offer was at once inviting and at the same time repulsive. He had always wanted a Papa he could trust, but he wasn't sure he'd find it here, especially if this one couldn't even protect his Missy. A long silence hung between them. Mack was uncertain what to say, and she was in no hurry to let the moment pass easily. If you couldn't take care of Missy, how could I trust you to take care of me? There he said it, the question that had tormented him every day of the great sadness. Mack felt his face flush angry red as he stared at what he now considered to be some odd characterization of God, and he realized his hands were knotted into fists. Mack, I'm so sorry. Tears began to trail down her cheeks. I know what a great gulf this has put between us. I know you don't understand this yet, but I am especially fond of Missy, and you too. He loved the way she said Missy's name, and yet he hated it coming from her. It rolled off her tongue like the sweetest wine, and even through all the fury still raging in his mind, he somehow knew she meant it. He wanted to believe her, and slowly some of his rage began to subside. That's why you're here, Mack, she continued. I want to heal the wound that has grown inside of you and between us. To gain some control, he turned his eyes toward the floor. It was a full minute before he had enough to whisper without looking up. I think I'd like that, he admitted, but I don't see how. Honey, there's no easy answer that will take your pain away. Believe me, if I had one, I'd use it now. I have no magic wand to wave over you and make it all better. Life takes a bit of time and a lot of relationship. Mack was glad they were stepping back from the edge of this ugly accusation. It had scared him how near he had come to being totally overwhelmed by it. I think it'd be easier to have this conversation if you weren't wearing a dress, he suggested and attempted to smile, as weak as it was. If it were easier, then it wouldn't be, she said with a slight giggle. I'm not trying to make this harder for either of us, but this is a good place to start. I often find that getting head issues out of the way first makes the hard stuff easier to work on later. When you're ready. She picked up the wooden spoon again, dripping with some sort of batter. Mackenzie, I am neither male nor female, even though both genders are derived from my nature. If I choose to appear to you as a man or a woman, it's because I love you. For me to appear to you as a woman and suggest that you call me Papa is simply to mix metaphors to help you keep from falling so easily back into your religious conditions. She leaned forward as if to share a secret. To reveal myself to you as a very large white grandfather figure with flowing beard, like Gandalf, would simply reinforce your religious stereotypes. And this weekend is not about reinforcing your religious stereotypes. Mac almost laughed out loud and wanted to say, You think? I'm over here barely believing that I'm not stark raving mad. Instead, he focused on what she had just said and regained his composure. He believed, in his head at least, that God was a spirit, neither male nor female. But in spite of that, he was embarrassed to admit to himself that all his visuals for God were very white and very male. She stopped talking, but only long enough to put away some seasonings into a spice rack on a ledge by the window, and then turned to face him again. She looked Mac intently. Hasn't it always been a problem for you to embrace me as your father? And after what you've been through, you couldn't very well handle a father right now, could you? He knew she was right, and he realized the kindness and compassion in what she was doing. Somehow, the way she had approached him had skirted his resistance to her love. It was strange and painful, and maybe even a little bit wonderful. But then he paused, still focused on staying rational. Why is there such an emphasis on you being a father? I mean, it seems to be the way you most reveal yourself. Well, responded Papa, turning away from him and bustling around the kitchen. There are many reasons for that, and some of them go very deep. Let me say for now that we knew once the creation was broken, true fathering would be much more lacking than mothering. Don't misunderstand me. Both are needed, but an emphasis on fathering is necessary because of the enormity of its absence. Mac turned away a bit bewildered, feeling he was already in over his head. As he reflected, he looked through the window at a wild looking garden. You knew I would come, didn't you? Mac finally spoke quietly. Of course I did. She was busy again, her back to him. Then was I free not to come? Did I not have a choice in the matter? Papa turned back to face him, now with flour and dough in her hands. Good question. How deep would you like to go? She didn't wait for a response, knowing that Mac didn't have one. Instead, she asked, Do you believe you are free to leave? I suppose I am. Am I? Of course you are. I'm not interested in prisoners. You're free to walk out that door right now and go home to your empty house. Or you could go down to the grind and hang out with Willie. Just because I know you're too curious to go, does that reduce your freedom to leave? She paused only briefly and then turned back to her task, talking to him over her shoulder. Or, if you want to go just a wee bit deeper, we could talk about the nature of freedom itself. Does freedom mean that you are allowed to do whatever you want to do? Or we could talk about all the limiting influences in your life that actively work against your freedom, your family genetic heritage, your specific DNA, your metabolic uniqueness, the quantum stuff that is going on at the subatomic level where only I am the always present observer, or the intrusion of your soul's sickness that inhibits and binds you, or the social influences around you, or the habits that have been created that have created synaptic bonds and pathways in your brain. And then there's advertising, propaganda, and paradigms. Inside that confluence of multifaceted inhibitors, she sighed. What is freedom really? Mac just stood there not knowing what to say. Only I can set you free, Mackenzie, but freedom can never be forced. I don't understand, replied Mac. I don't even understand what you just told me. She turned back and smiled. I know. I didn't tell you so that you would understand right now. I told you for later. At this point, you don't even comprehend that freedom is an incremental process. Gently reaching out, she took Mac's hand in hers, flower covered and all, and looking him straight in his eyes, she continued, Mackenzie, the truth shall set you free, and the truth has a name. He's over in the wood shop right now, covered in sawdust. Everything is about him, and freedom is a process that happens inside a relationship with him. Then all that stuff you feel churning around inside will start to work its way out. How can you really know how I feel? Max stated, looking back into her eyes. Papa didn't answer, only looked down at their hands. His gaze followed hers, and for the first time, Mac noticed the scars in her wrists, like those he now assumed Jesus also had on his. She allowed him to tenderly touch the scars, outlines of deep piercings, and he finally looked up again in her eyes. Tears were slowly making their way down her face, little pathways through the flour that dusted her cheeks. Don't ever think that what my son chose to do didn't cost us dearly. Love always leaves a significant mark. She stated softly and gently, we were there together. Mac was surprised. At the cross? Now wait, I thought you left him. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? It was a scripture that had haunted Mac during the great sadness. He misunderstood the mystery there. Regardless of what he felt at that moment, I never left him. How can you say that? You abandoned him just like you abandoned me. Mackenzie, I never left him, and I have never left you. That makes no sense to me, he snapped. I know it doesn't, at least not yet. Will you at least consider this? When all you can see is your pain, perhaps then you lose sight of me. Mac did not respond. She turned back to her cooking so as to offer him a little needed space. She seemed to be preparing a number of dishes all at once, adding various spices and ingredients, humming a haunting little tune. She put the finishing touches on the pie that she had been making and slid it into the oven. Don't forget the story. Don't forget, the story didn't end in his sense of forsakenness. He found his way through it to put himself completely into my hands. Oh, what a moment that was. Mac leaned against the counter, somewhat bewildered. His emotions and thoughts were all jumbled. Part of him wanted to believe everything Papa was saying. That would be nice. But another part was objecting rather loudly. This can't possibly be true. Papa reached for the kitchen timer, gave it a little twist, and placed it on the table in front of them. I'm not who you think I am, Mackenzie. Her words weren't angry or defensive. Mac looked at her, looked at the timer, and sighed. I feel totally lost. Then let's see if we can find you in this mess. Almost as if on cue, a blue jay landed on the kitchen windowsill and began strutting back and forth. Papa reached into a tin on the counter, sliding the window open, offered Mr. J a mixture of grains that she must have kept just for that purpose. Without any hesitation and with a seeming air of humility and thankfulness, the bird walked straight to her hand and began feeding. Consider our little friend here, she began. Most birds were created to fly. Being grounded for them is a limitation within their ability to fly, not the other way around. She paused to let Mac think about her statement. You, on the other hand, were created to be loved. So for you to live as if you were unloved is a limitation, not the other way around. Mack nodded his head, not so much in full agreement, but more as a signal that at least he understood and was tracking. That seemed simple enough. Living unloved is like clipping a bird's wings and removing its ability to fly. Not something I want for you. There's the rub. He didn't feel particularly loved at the moment. Mack, pain has a way of clipping our wings and keeping us from being able to fly. She waited a moment, allowing her words to settle. And if left unresolved for very long, you can almost forget that you were ever created to fly in the first place. Mack was silent. Strangely, the silence was not that uncomfortable. Mack looked at the little bird. The bird looked back at Mack. He wondered if it was possible for birds to smile. At least Mr. J looked like he was. Perhaps, if only sympathetically. I'm not like you, Mack. It wasn't a put down. It was a simple statement of fact. But to Mack, it felt like a splash of cold water. I am God. I am who I am. And unlike you, my wings can't be clipped. Well, that's wonderful for you, but where exactly does that leave me? Mack blurted out, sounding more irritated than he would have liked. Papa began stroking the little bird, brought him up close to her face, and said, smack dab in the center of my love, as the two cuddled nose to beak. I'm thinking that bird probably understands that better than I do, was the best Mack could offer. I know, honey. That's why we're here. Why do you think I said I'm not like you? Well, I really have no idea. I mean, you're God and I'm not. He couldn't keep the sarcasm out of his voice, but she ignored it completely. Yes, but not exactly. At least not in the way you're thinking. Mackenzie, I am what some would say holy and wholly other than you. The problem is that many folks try to grasp some sense of who I am by taking the best version of themselves, projecting that to the ninth degree, factoring in all the goodness they can perceive, which often isn't much, and then call that God. And while it may seem like a notable effort, the truth is that it falls pitifully short of who I really am. I'm not merely the best version of you that you can think of. I am far more than that, beyond and beyond all that you can ask or think. I'm sorry, but those are just words to me. They don't make much sense. Max shrugged. Even though you can't finally grasp me, guess what? I still want to be known. You're talking about Jesus, right? Is this going to be a let's try to understand the Trinity sort of thing? She chuckled. Sort of. But this isn't Sunday school. This is a flying lesson. Mackenzie, as you might imagine, there are some advantages to being God. But by nature, I am completely unlimited, without bounds. I have always known fullness. I live in a state of perpetual satisfaction as my normal state of existence, she said, quite pleased. Just one of the perks of me being me. That made Max smile. This lady was fully enjoying herself all by herself, and there wasn't an ounce of arrogance to spoil it. We created you to share in that. But then Adam chose to go at it on his own, as we knew he would, and everything got messed up. But instead of scraping the whole creation, we rolled up our sleeves and entered into the middle of the mess. That's what we have done in Jesus. Mac was hanging in there, trying his best to follow her train of thought. When we three spoke ourselves into human existence as the Son of God, we became fully human. We also chose to embrace all the limitations that this entailed. Even though we have always been present in this created universe, we now became flesh and blood. It would be like this bird, whose nature it is to fly, choosing only to walk and remaining grounded. It doesn't stop being the bird, but it does alter his experience of life significantly. She paused to make sure Mac was still tracking. While there was a definite cramp forming in his brain, he voiced an okay, inviting her to continue. Although by nature he is fully God, Jesus is fully human and lives as such. While never losing the innate ability to fly, He chooses moment by moment to remain grounded. That is why his name is Emmanuel, God with us, or God with you, to be more precise. But what about all the miracles, the healings, raising people from the dead? Doesn't that prove that Jesus was God, more than human? No, it proves that Jesus is truly human. What? Mackenzie, I can fly, but humans can't. Jesus is fully human, although he is also fully God. He has never drawn upon his nature as God to do anything. He has only lived out his relationship with me, living in the very same manner that I desire to be in relationship with every human being. It is just the first, he is just the first to do it to the uttermost, the first to absolutely trust my life within him, the first to believe in my love and my goodness without regard for appearance or consequence. So when he healed the blind, he did so as a dependent, limited human being, trusting in my life and power to be at work within him and through him. Jesus, as a human being, had no power within himself to heal anyone. It came as a shock to Mack's religious system. Only as he rested in his relationship with me and in our communion, our co-union, could he express my heart and will into any given circumstance. So when you look at Jesus and it appears that he's flying, he really is flying. But what you're actually seeing is me, my life in him. That's how he lives and acts as a true human, how every human is designed to live out of my life. A bird's not defined by being grounded, but his ability to fly. Remember this, humans are not defined by their limitations, but by the intentions that I have for them. Not by what they seem to be, but by everything it means to be created in my image. Mack felt the onset of information overload, so he pulled up a chair and just sat down. This would take some time to comprehend. So does this mean that you are limited when Jesus was on earth? I mean, did you limit yourself only to Jesus? Not at all. Although I have only been limited in Jesus, I've never been limited in myself. There's that whole Trinity thing, which is where I kind of get lost. Papa laughed a long, rich belly laugh that made Mack want to join in. She set the little bird down on the table next to Mack, turned to open the oven, and gave the pie that was baking a quick little look. Satisfied that everything was fine, Papa then pulled up a chair alongside them. Mack looked at the little bird, who amazingly was content to just sit there with them. The absurdity of it all made Mack chuckle. To begin with, that you can't grasp the wonder of my nature is rather a good thing. Who wants to worship a God who can be fully comprehended, huh? Not much mystery in that. But what difference does it make that there are three of you and you are all one God? Did I say that right? Right enough, she grinned. Mackenzie, it makes all the difference in the world. She seemed to be enjoying this. We are not three gods, and we are not talking about one God with three attitudes, like a man who is a husband, father, and a worker. I am one God. I am three persons, and each of the three is fully and entirely the one. The Mack had been suppressing finally Mack had been suppressing finally surfaced in all its glory. Never mind that, she continued. What's important is this. If I were simply one God and only one person, then you would find yourself in this creation without something wonderful, without something essential even. And I would be utterly other than I am. And we would be without, Mac didn't even know how to finish the question, love and relationship. All love and relationship is possible for you only because it already exists within me, within God, myself. Love is not the limitation. Love is the flying. I am love. As if in response to her declaration, the timer dinged and the little bird took off and flew out the window. Watching the jay in flight took on a new level of delight. He turned back to Papa and just stared at her in wonder. She was so beautiful and astonishing. And even though he was feeling a little lost, and even though the great sadness still attended him, he felt himself settling down somewhat into the safety of being close to her. You do understand, she continued, that unless I had an object to love, or more accurately, a someone to love, if I did not have such a relationship within myself, then I would not be capable of love at all. You would have a God who could not love. Or maybe worse, you would have a God who, when he chose, could only love as a limitation of his nature. That kind of God could possibly act without love. And that would be a disaster. And that is surely not me. With that, Papa stood up, went to the oven door, pulled out the freshly baked pie, set it out on the counter, turning around as if to present herself, and said, the God who is, the God I am who I am, cannot act apart from love. Mack knew that what he was hearing, as hard as it was to understand, was something amazing and incredible. It was as if her words were wrapping themselves around him, embracing him and speaking to him in ways beyond just what he could hear. Not that he actually believed any of it. If only it were true. His experience told him otherwise. This weekend is about relationship and love. Now I know you have a lot you want to talk about, right? But right now, you'd better go wash up. The other two are on their way in for supper. She began to walk away, but paused and turned back. Mackenzie, I know that your heart is full of pain and anger and a lot of confusion. Together, you and I will get around to some of that while you're here. But I also want you to know that there is more going on than you could imagine or understand, even if I told you. As much as you are able, rest in what trust you have in me, no matter how small, okay? Mack had lowered his head and was looking at the floor. She knows, he thought. Small? His little must be barely to the right of none. Nodding agreement, he looked up and noticed again the scars on her wrist. Papa, Mack finally said in a way that felt very awkward, but he was trying. Yes, honey. Mack struggled for the words to tell her what was in his heart. I'm so sorry that Jesus had to die. She walked around the table and gave Mack another big hug. I know you are, and thank you. But you need to know that we aren't sorry at all. It was worth it. Isn't that right, son? She turned and asked her question of Jesus, who had just entered the cabin. Absolutely, he paused and then looked at Mack. And I would have done it even if it were only for you. But it wasn't, he said with an inviting grin. Mack excused himself and found the bathroom, where he washed his hands and his face and tried to collect himself. That was good. That was good. And he's about to get into some things. He's about to get into some questions, and I'm glad in that chapter, I am glad that he did kind of show his feelings a little bit, although I think he was trying to hold back because he didn't want to be disrespectful, so to speak. But I'm glad that he did kind of open up a little bit, because it's clear he couldn't hide it from Papa. Come on, you can't hide it because she knows already, you know. But I'm glad that he did allow himself a bit of vulnerability, and he's slowly but surely, I think she's slowly but surely, bringing him down a little bit, but at his own pace. Though I love the fact that it's showing that she's not forcing herself on him. She's patient. That's what it is. That's the word. She's so patient with him, and I love that. Okay, here we go. Moving on to chapter 7. God on the dock. God on the dock. There's a quote from C.S. Lewis that states, let's pray that the human race never escapes Earth to spread its iniquity elsewhere. Okay. Let's pray that the human race never escapes Earth to spread its iniquity elsewhere. Max stood in the bathroom looking into the mirror while wiping his face dry with a towel. He was searching for some sign of insanity, and those eyes, excuse me, staring back at him. Was this real? Of course not. It was impossible. But then he reached out his hand and slowly touched the mirror. Maybe this was a hallucination being brought on by all his grief and despair. Maybe it was a dream and he was asleep somewhere. Maybe in the shack freezing to death. Maybe suddenly a terrible crash broke into his reverie. It came from the direction of the kitchen, and Mack froze. For a moment, there was a dead silence, and then unexpected, he heard uproariously, uproarious laughter. Curious, he exited the bathroom and poked his head through the doorway of the kitchen. Mack was shocked at the scene in front of him. It appeared that Jesus had dropped a large bowl of some sort of batter or sauce on the floor, and it was everywhere. It must have landed close to Papa because the lower portion of her skirt and bare feet were covered in the gooey mess. All three were laughing so hard that Mack didn't think they were breathing. Sarayu said something about humans being clumsy, and all three started roaring again. Finally, Jesus brushed past Mack and returned a minute later with a large basin of water and towels. Sarayu had already started wiping the goop from the floor and cupboards, but Jesus went straight to Papa, kneeling at her feet, began to wipe off the front of her clothes. He worked down to her feet and gently lifted one foot at a time, which he directed into the basin where he cleaned and massaged it. Oh, that feels so good, exclaimed Papa as she continued her task at the counter. As he leaned against the doorway watching, Mack's mind was full of thoughts. So this was God in relationship. It was beautiful and so appealing. He knew that it didn't matter whose fault it was. The mess from some bowl had been broken, that a dish that had been planned would not be shared. Obviously, what was truly important here was the love that they had for one another and the fullness it brought them. He shook his head. How different this was from the way he treated the ones he loved. Supper was simple, but a feast nonetheless. Roast bird of some kind in an orangey, mangoey kind of sauce. Fresh vegetables spiced with who but God knew what, all fruity and gingery, tangy and peppery. Rice, the quality of which Mack had never before tasted, could have been a meal by itself. The only awkward part was at the very beginning when Mack, out of habit, bowed his head before he remembered where he was. He looked up to find the three of them all grinning at him. So, as nonchalantly as he could, he asked, thank you all. Could I have a bit of that rice there? Sure. We were going to have this incredible Japanese sauce, but greasy fingers over there, Papa nodded towards Jesus, decided to see if it would bounce. Come on now, Jesus responded in mock defense. My hands were slippery. What can I say? Papa winked at Mack and she passed him the rice. You just can't get good help around here. Everyone laughed. Conversation seemed almost normal. Mack was asked about each of the children except concerns for Kate. The three only nodded with concerned expressions, but offered him no counsel or wisdom. He also answered questions about his friends, and Sarah, you seemed most interested in asking about Nan. Finally, Mack blurted out something that had been bothering him throughout the discussion. Now, here I am telling you about my kids and my friends and about Nan, but you already know everything I'm telling you, don't you? You're acting like it's the first time you heard it. Sorry, you reached across the table and took his hand. Mackenzie, remember our conversation earlier about limitation? Our conversation? He glanced over at Papa, who was nodding knowingly. You can't share with one and not share with us all, Sarah, you said and smiled. Remember that choosing to stay on the ground is a choice to facilitate a relationship, to honor it. Mackenzie, you do this yourself. You don't play a game or color a picture with a child to show your superiority. Rather, you choose to limit yourself so as to facilitate and honor that relationship. You will even lose a competition to accomplish love. It is not about winning or losing, but about love and respect. So when I'm telling you about my children, we have limited ourselves out of respect for you. We're not bringing to mind, as it were, our knowledge of your children as we are listening to you. It is as if this is the first time we have known about them. We take great delight in seeing them through your eyes. I like that, reflected Mac, sitting back in his chair. Sarah, you squeezed his hand and seemed to sit back. I do too. Relationships are never about power. And one way to avoid the will to power is to choose to limit oneself to serve. Humans often do this in touching the infirm and sick, in serving the ones whose minds have left to wander, in relating to the poor, in loving the very old and the very young, or even in caring for the other who has assumed a position of power over them. Well spoken, Sarah, you, said Papa, her face beaming with pride. I'll take care of the dishes later. But first, I would like to have a time of devotion. Mac had to suppress a snicker at the thought of God having devotions. Images of family devotions from his childhood came spilling into his mind. Not exactly good memories. Often, it was a tedious and boring exercise in coming up with the right answers, or rather, the same old answers to the same old Bible story questions, and then trying to stay awake during his father's excruciatingly long prayers. And when his father had been drinking, family devotions devolved into a terrifying minefield where any wrong answer or inadvertent glance could trigger an explosion. He half expected Jesus to pull out a huge old King James Bible. Instead, Jesus reached across the table and took Papa's hand in his. Scars now clearly visible on his wrists. Max sat transfixed as he watched Jesus kiss his father's hands and then look deep into his father's eyes and finally say, Papa, I loved watching you today as you made yourself fully available to take Mac's pain into yourself and then give him space to choose his own timing. You honored him and you honored me. To listen to you whisper love and calm into his heart was truly incredible. What a joy to watch. I love being your son. Although Mac felt like he was intruding, no one else seemed concerned that he really had no idea where he would have gone in any case. To be in the presence of such love express seemed to dislodge an inner emotional logjam. And while he didn't understand exactly what he felt, it was good. What was he witnessing? Something simple, warm, intimate, genuine. This was holy. Holiness had always been a cold and sterile concept to Mac, but this was neither. Concerned that any movement on his part might shatter the moment, he simply closed his eyes and folded his hands in front of him. Listening intently with his eyes shut, he heard Jesus move his chair. There was a pause before he spoke again. Sorry, you, Jesus, Jesus began softly and tenderly. You wash, I'll dry. Mac's eyes snapped open in time to see the two smiling broadly at each other, picking up the dishes and disappearing into the kitchen. He sat for a few minutes, unsure about what to do. Papa had gone somewhere, and now that the other two were busy with dishes, well, it was an easy decision. He picked up silverware and glasses and he headed to the kitchen. As soon as he had put them down for Sarah to wash, Jesus tossed him a dish towel and they both began drying. Sarah began humming the same evocative tune he'd heard earlier with Papa, and Jesus and Max simply listened as they worked. More than once, the melody stirred Mac deep inside, knocking again at the door. To him, it sounded Gaelic, and he could almost hear breath pipes in accompaniment. But as difficult as it was for Mac to stay and allow his emotions to well up so powerfully, the melody absolutely captured him. If he could just keep listening to her, he would be thrilled to do dishes for the rest of his life. 10 minutes or so later, they were finished. Jesus kissed Sarayu on the cheek, and she disappeared around the corner. He then turned and smiled at Mac. Let's go on the dock and look at the stars. What about the others? Mac asked. I'm here, Jesus replied. I'm always here. Mack nodded. This presence of God thing, although hard to grasp, seemed to be steadily penetrating past his mind and into his heart. He let it go at that. Come on, said Jesus, interrupting Mack's thought. I know you enjoy looking at stars. Want to? He sounded just like a child full of anticipation and expectancy. Yeah, I think so, answered Mack, realizing that the last time he had done that was on the ill-fated camping trip with the kids. Maybe it was time to take a few risks. He followed Jesus out the back door. In the waning moments of twilight, Mack could make out the rocky shore of the lake, not out overgrown, as he remembered, but beautifully kept and picture perfect. The nearby creek seemed to be humming some sort of musical tune. Protruding about 50 feet into the lake was a dock, and Mack could barely make out 3 canoes tied at intervals along its course. Night was falling quickly, and the distant darkness was already thick with the sounds of crickets and bullfrogs. Jesus took his arm and led him up the path while his eyes adjusted, but already Mack was looking up into a moonless night at the wonder of the emerging stars. They made their way 3 quarters up the dock and lay down on their backs looking up. The elevation of this place seemed to magnify the heavens, and Mack reveled in seeing stars in such numbers and clarity. Jesus suggested that they close their eyes for a few moments, allowing the last effects of dusk to disappear for the night. Mack complied, and when he finally opened his eyes, the sight was so powerful that he experienced vertigo for a few seconds. It almost felt like he was falling up into space, the stars racing towards him as if to embrace him. He lifted his hands, imagining that he could reach out and pluck diamonds, one by one, off of a velvety black sky. Wow, he whispered. Incredible, whispered Jesus, his head near Max in the darkness. I never get tired of this. Even though you created it, Mac asked. I created it as the Word before the Word became flesh. So even though I created this, I see it now as a human. And I must say, it is impressive. It certainly is. Mac was not sure how to describe what he felt. But as they continued to lie in silence, gazing into the celestial display, watching and listening, he knew in his heart that this too was holy. As they both watched in awestruck wonder, shooting stars would occasionally blaze a brief trail across the night blackness, causing one or the other to exclaim, Did you see that? Awesome. After a particularly long silence, Max spoke. I feel more comfortable around you. You seem so different than the other two. How do you mean different? Came his soft voice out of the darkness. Well, Mac paused as he thought about it. More real, more tangible. I don't know. He struggled with the words, and Jesus lay quiet, waiting. It's like I've always known you, but Papa isn't at all what I expected from God, or sorry, you. She's way out there. Jesus chuckled in the dark. Since I am human, we have much in common to begin with, but I still don't understand. I am the best way any human can relate to Papa or Sarayu. To see me is to see them. The love you sense from me is no different from how they love you. And believe me, Papa and Sarayu are just as real as I am, though as you've seen in far different ways. Speaking of Sarayu, is she the Holy Spirit? Yes, she is creativity. She is action. She is the breathing of life. She is much more. She is my spirit. And her name, Sarayu, that is a simple name from one of our human languages. It means wind, a common wind, actually. She loves that name. Hmm, grunted Mac. Nothing too common about her. True that, responded Jesus. And the name Papa mentioned Elo, El, Alucia. The voice spoke reverently from the dark next to him. That is a wonderful name. El is my name as creator God, but Usia is being or that which is truly real. So the name means the creator God who is truly real and the ground of being all being. Now that is also a beautiful name. There was silence for a minute while Mack pondered what Jesus had said. So then, where does that leave us? He felt like he was asking the questions for the entire human race, right where you always were intended to be, in the very center of our love and our purpose. Again, a pause. Then, I suppose I can live with that. Jesus chuckled. I'm glad to hear that. And they both laughed. Neither spoke for a time. Stillness had fallen like a blanket, and all Mac was really aware of was the sound of water lapping up against the dock. It was he who eventually broke the silence again. Jesus? Yes, Mackenzie. I'm surprised by one thing about you. Really? What? I guess I expected you to be more, be careful here, Mac. Well, humanly striking? Jesus chuckled. Humanly striking? You mean handsome? Now he was laughing. Well, I was trying to avoid that, but yes. Somehow I thought you'd be the ideal man, athletic and overwhelmingly good looking. It's my nose, isn't it? Mac didn't know what to say. Jesus laughed. I am Jewish. My grandfather on my mother's side had a big nose. In fact, most of the men on my mom's side had big noses. I just thought you'd be better looking. By whose standards? Anyway, once you really get to know me, it won't matter to you. The words, though delivered kindly, stung. Stung what exactly? Mac lay there a few seconds and realized that as much as he thought he knew Jesus, perhaps he didn't. Not really. Maybe what he knew was an icon, an ideal, an image through which he tried to grasp a sense of spirituality, but not a real person. Why is that? He finally asked. You said if I really knew you, it wouldn't matter what you look like. It is quite simple, really. Being always transcends appearance, that which only seems to be. Once you begin to know the being behind the very pretty or very ugly face, as determined by your bias, the surface appearances fade away until they simply no longer matter. That is why Elusia is such a wonderful name. God, who is the ground of all being, dwells in, around, and through all things, ultimately emerging as the real. And any appearances that mask that reality will fall away. That's good. Silence followed as Mac wrestled with what Jesus had said. He gave up only after a minute or two and decided to ask the riskier question. You said I don't really know you. It would be a lot easier if we could always talk like this. Admittedly, Mac, this is special. You were really stuck, and we wanted to help you crawl out of that pain. But don't think that just because I'm not visible, our relationship is to be less real. It will be different, but perhaps even more real. How is that? My purpose from the beginning was to live in you and you in me. Wait a minute. How can that happen? If you're still fully human, how can you be inside of me? Astounding, isn't it? It's Papa's miracle. It is the power of Serayu, my spirit, the spirit of God who restores the union that was lost so long ago. Me, I chose to live moment by moment fully human. I am fully God, but I am human to the core. Like I said, it's Papa's miracle. Mac was lying in the darkness, listening intently. Aren't you talking about a real indwelling, not just some positional theological thing? Of course, answered Jesus, his voice strong and sure. It's what everything is all about. The human, formed out of the physical material creation, can once more be fully indwelt by spiritual life, my life. It requires that a very real, dynamic, and active union exist. That is almost unbelievable, Mac exclaimed quietly. I had no idea. I need to think more about this, but I might have a lot more questions. And we have your lifetime to sort through them, Jesus chuckled. But enough of that for now. Let's get lost again in the starry night. In the silence that followed, Mack simply lay still, allowing the immensity of space and scattered light to dwarf him, letting his perceptions be captured by starlight and the thought that everything was about him, about the human race, that all of this was all for us. After what seemed like a long time, it was Jesus who broke into the silence. I'll never get tired of looking at this. The wonder of it all, the wastefulness of creation, as one of our brothers has called it. So elegant, so full of longing and beauty, even now. You know, Mac responded, suddenly struck anew by the absurdity of his situation, where he was, the person next to him. Sometimes you sound so, I mean, here I am lying next to God Almighty, and you really sound so human, Jesus offered, but ugly. And with that, he began to chuckle quietly and restrained his fur at first. But after a couple of snorts, laughter simply started tumbling out. It was infectious, and Mac found himself swept along from somewhere deep inside. He had not laughed from down there in a long time. Jesus reached over and hugged him, shaking from his own spasms of mirth, and Mac felt more clean and alive and well than he had since, well, he couldn't remember since when. Eventually, they both calmed again, and the night's quiet asserted itself once more. It seemed that even the frogs had called it quits. Mac lay there, realizing that he was now feeling guilty about enjoying himself, about laughing, and even in the darkness, he could feel the great sadness roll in and over him. Jesus, he whispered as his voice choked, I feel so lost. A hand reached out and squeezed his and didn't let go. I know, Mac, but it's not true. I'm with you, and I'm not lost. I'm sorry it feels that way, but hear me clearly. You are not lost. I hope you're right, Max said, his tension lessened by the words of his newfound friend. Come on, said Jesus, standing up and reaching down for Mac. You have a big day ahead of you. Let's get you to bed. He put his arm around Mac's shoulder, and together they walked back toward the cabin. Mac was suddenly exhausted. Today had been a long day. Maybe he would wake up at home in his own bed after a night of vivid dreaming, but somewhere inside he hoped he was wrong. Oh, wow. That was good. So that was the end of chapter 7, God on the Dock. Um, on Sunday, we will be reading chapters 8 and 9. Okay. Chapter 8 is called The Breakfast of Champions. And let me zoom through to chapter 9. Chapter 9 is called, where did I get to? I got to it just a second ago. Chapter, okay. Breakfast of Champions is chapter 8. One second. I think I sped through it too fast. That was so good. And I can really relate to that last to them laying and watching the stars. I do it every single night. Chapter 9 is called A Long Time Ago in a Garden Far, Far Away. So I'm sure that's when he's going to spend time with Sarayu. But I can so relate to the number one. I loved the conversation that they had, that he had with both with Papa in the kitchen. I'm glad that he allowed himself in chapter 6. He allowed himself to be vulnerable. But I love also the conversation that he had at the table. I love when they stated, excuse me, all three of them, what Sarayu said, reiterated the story that, I mean, the conversation that he and Papa had in the kitchen, that they, meaning God, Spirit, and Jesus, they limit themselves, meaning they come down to our level to allow us to share with them this life or these experiences from our level through our eyes. So they asked him about his children and about his wife, and he's explaining until it dawned on him, and he says, wait a minute, y'all know this. Y'all know my kids, so why y'all, and I'm so glad that they said it's not about whether we know them or not. Of course we know them, but We want to know them through your eyes. So they were able to bring themselves down. That right there, that said everything. Because in this life, right? How often are we trying to one up each other, or we're trying to overshadow somebody else's story, or take away their shine or whatever to have a bigger shine? I'm glad that Sarah you said in that at the table, it's not about having the power or having the leverage or knowing more about your family than you do. It's not about that. Regardless of whether I know or not, I'm willing to humble myself to know them through you, know them how you see them. I want to share with me from your view, you know? And the fact that he was sharing with them, they asked him those questions, he shared with them from his lens. And they were intrigued. They were like, really? Oh my goodness. Oh, that's awesome. Even though they knew all things. That's what Christ, the story of Christ, the stories of Christ in the Bible. It talked about how he spoke in parables, how he came down to their level, how he limited himself to see the way they see, to teach from their level, to get them to understand things on their level. He didn't come to try to show them up. No, he came to connect with them as them. Mm. And I also love, because I understand, I understand the oneness of us being connected to all that is, right? And God in us, as us, through us. I understand it for myself. I live from that space every time. I see the leaves falling right now in the fall season. And it's beautiful to me. And every time I see a butterfly flying, or every time I see the sun blazing, or the stars in the sky, I say, oh my goodness. I say, this is so beautiful. I am so impressively beautiful, and I'm experiencing me from a human viewpoint. And it is just like Christ, Jesus said to Mack, yes, I created these things, but now I'm experiencing these things created as a human. And I get to see and marvel at the craftsmanship of the creation. I kid you not, every single night, I look at the stars, and I look at the full moon, and I look at the skies, and I look at the clouds, and that's how I see nature. I see nature that same way. That's how I see the animals and my dogs, or the butterflies and the trees and the flowers. I see everything created from that same lens. I have such an appreciation and admiration and gratitude for all things created in that very same way. And so to read that in the words of Christ as told to Mack, it resonated so deeply, because I do that right now for myself, you know? And it's like, oh man, it's a feeling like no other. I love that. Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. Waters flowing, and mountains, the majestic mountains, and all of it. It's just like, oh, it's amazing. I love it. I really, really do. And to get that experience from him, and how he experienced that, and uh they're not only are they patient with him and opening him up so that he can, in his own timing, can feel safe and vulnerable and all of that, which he slowly but surely, as we can see, he's slowly but surely getting there. He's also experiencing, it's like he's reconnecting himself with things that matter, that he long before the great sadness, he probably experienced that. He stated before they went and saw the stars. The last time he really sat and looked at the stars was right before his daughter was abducted. 3 years prior. And they're reactivating his appreciation and love, that spark that he once had, while also mending his broken heart, you know? So I'm excited, man. I'm excited about the next chapters, 8 and 9. We'll be here on Sunday to read those, and that is at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, um, 7 p.m. Central, and 2 p.m. Pacific, okay? Alrighty, you all. That's it for now. On Tuesdays, I don't like to keep you for too long. I'm actually really, really glad that we were able to jet through those 2 chapters so quickly, just over an hour. That's beautiful. Awesome, awesome, awesome. I like to keep you around that time, okay? If you all don't have the reading material, no worries. Let me know and I will get it over to you. Just send me an email. Okay, send me an email with where you want me to send the PDF ebook version to, and I'll get it over to you. My email address is info@biancamissblee.com. Again, that is info@biancamissblee.com. Go ahead and shoot the information over. I am a nonprofit organization, a 501c3, and we do take donations and things like that. But a donation, they're welcome. Although welcome, they are not required for you to receive your PDF ebook, okay? Every book that we read collectively, I would like for you to have it so that you can have it, number one, in your library, and number two, you can have it to read along with us. Or whenever you do get a chance to read along. You may not be able to be with us in person, but at least you can play back, which I love the flexibility of the archived videos, the save videos, save live sessions and things like that, for you to be able to follow at your own timing, whenever you can, however you would like to, okay? It's right there, readily available for you. Visit my website, you all. Go to website and you can see what I do. You can partake in some of the services, purchase some books, get some merchandise and things like that. The merchandise is also at walmart.com. So anywhere you want to get it from, you're more than welcome to do so. Also, the books are available on Amazon as well as my website. It's easier to go through my website because you don't have to go through all of the middle people or whatever. But however you got to get it, it's up to you. Services are there as well. And the nonprofit, more about the nonprofit and what we do, our programs and things like that, and how you can be a part is also there as well. Okay. Follow me on social media, you all: Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Clubhouse. All of that is Dr. Bianca Missy Lee. Okay. Dr. Bianca Missy Lee. Alrighty, you all. Listen, that concludes tonight's section. I appreciate you. I love you. I mean it. There's absolutely positively nothing you can do about it. Don't you even try it. We will be back here on Sunday early evening, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here at Divine Femininity United. Peace.